When you sit down to decide on a pre-built gaming rig, the first thing that pops into most people's heads is the fear of overpaying for specs you'll never really tap, or ending up with a box that looks impressive on paper, but feels cramped in the real world. I get that hesitation, because the market is flooded with machines that shout 14 cores, or 2 terabytes SSD, while leaving you guessing about things like noise, upgradability, or whether the price really matches the day-to-day experience. In this review, I'm going to break down exactly what the ASUS ROG Strix G700 brings to the table, where it actually saves you money, where you might end up paying for features you don't need, and who should walk away. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's start with the basics of the gaming PC category. Most buyers want a machine that boots in under a minute, runs the latest titles at smooth frame rates, and can handle a bit of multitasking, whether that's streaming, video editing, or just having dozens of apps open while you game. At the same time, a lot of gamers are also collectors. They amass a growing library of AAA releases, mods, and DLCs, so storage quickly becomes a pain point. On the flip side, the biggest complaints about pre-built towers are hidden trade-offs. A powerful CPU paired with a mid-range GPU, or a massive amount of RAM that never really gets used because games rarely need more than 16 gigabytes. Those mismatches are where value evaporates. The G700 tries to address the storage headache head-on, with a total of 14 TB 4 terabytes on an SSD, and an additional 10 terabytes on a traditional hard drive. In practical terms, that means you can install your OS, a handful of favorite games, and your editing software on the ultra-fast SSD, then dump the rest of your library, recordings, and media files onto the larger HDD without worrying about constantly juggling space. I've seen gamers with smaller builds run out of room after a few months, only to add external drives that clutter desks and add latency when loading textures. This internal capacity is a genuine convenience if you already own a sizable collection or plan to record streams in 1080p or 4K. The CPU is Intel's 15th Gen Core Ultra 7265K, a high-end chip that can turbo up to 5.60 GHz. For most modern games, that level of single-core performance translates to consistent frame rates, especially in titles that are still sepia-bound at lower resolutions. If you also dabble in video editing or run virtual machines, that extra headroom becomes noticeable when rendering timelines or switching between demanding applications. However, it's worth noting that the GPU is an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4060 Ti with 8 GB of GDDR6. That card is a solid performer at 1080p and can push 1440p in many games, but it stops short of delivering ultra-high settings at 4K. If your primary goal is to game at 4K with every visual turned on, you'll likely feel the bottleneck sooner than you'd expect. RAM is another headline feature, 128 GB of DDR5. For most gaming scenarios, 16 GB to 32 GB is already generous. Anything beyond that is usually reserved for heavy workstation tasks. The reality is that most AAA titles still top out at about 12 GB of memory usage, even with mods. So the 128 GB here is overkill unless you regularly run multiple virtual machines, massive Photoshop files, or simultaneous streaming and recording sessions while gaming. That said, the DDR5 speed does give a slight edge in texture loading and background tasks, and it future-proofs the machine for any upcoming titles that might start to lean on larger memory footprints. Now let's talk about the practical strengths that you'll feel in everyday use. First, the combination of Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3 ensures low latency, high-throughput wireless connections, which is a subtle but nice benefit when you're gaming on a wireless headset or need a reliable internet connection for competitive play. The rear port selection is generous, with multiple USB-C, USB-A, HDMI, and DisplayPort options, meaning you won't have to reach for a hub to hook up a capture card, external SSD, or a second monitor. The pre-installed Windows 11 Pro gives you the business-grade security features and remote desktop capabilities that content creators appreciate, while still supporting all the gaming optimizations you'd expect. On the flip side, there are a few trade-offs that can bite. The chassis is a full tower design, which, while providing space for cooling and the massive storage array, also means a larger footprint on your desk or floor. If you have limited space or prefer a minimalist setup, this isn't the most convenient form factor. Noise is another consideration. The 265K processor can generate noticeable heat under load, and the cooling system, while adequate, does rely on multiple fans that can become audible during marathon gaming sessions. For players who value a whisper-quiet environment,